I can fly.
It was 2008 and another solid and amazing superhero film was released. I don't know about you, but I was 7 years old when this movie came out. Man, time has passed. When I was a kid, this was just another exciting superhero film full of action with a guy in a stylish suit. Now rewatching it at my 20s, there were some interesting thoughts that came to my mind while watching this film. Would you like a cup of coffee and hear some of the reflections that we can have with Iron Man? Tony Stark is the owner of Stark Industries, a company which creates military weapons for the army. This is who Tony is in the beginning of the story. An interesting point we could notice about the character himself is that even though he's rich, having inherited his father's fortune and enterprise, that does not mean that he's the typical spoiled person who got everything and has nothing to live for the world. Actually, he's quite intelligent, a genius even, being able to create his own assistant robots and AI, our old pal Jarvis.
You are not authorized to access this area.
And this is an important detail actually. He uses his intelligence to help develop new military equipment to be sold and used by the army. And one of this equipment has its own demonstration within the story.
The Jericho.
I must confess, the name of the missile called my attention and reminded me of the biblical story related to the Hebrews and their attack at the city of Jericho. And in a short way, what happens in this story? The Hebrew people, led by the man called Joshua and guided by their God, plans to invade and destroy the city of Jericho. What most people remember of the story is that the Hebrews marched around the city one single time for 6 days, and 7 times on the 7th and last day, followed by screaming and the fall of the Jericho walls and their attack. Now, perhaps what most people don't remember or don't know is what happens before the invasion, where 2 Hebrew spies entered the city to collect information and ended up finding an unexpected ally inside the city, a prostitute called Ahab that helped them hide in her house, and in return established an agreement with the 2 spies, where she and her family would be safe during and after the Hebrew invasion. The point is that an inside job happened within the city before its fall. Something similar we see in different angles in this movie. It started in the beginning and with the revelation of the antagonist. For those who didn't read the comics, like me at the time, the reason why Tony Stark was captured was because the terrorists wanted in the first place. Like, the intention, the idea didn't start with them. It actually came from one of the closest people to Stark, Obadiah Stane. Put yourself in Tony's shoes. Would you ever imagine that the person who worked with your father, managed his company after his death, and became your partner when you took the leadership was also your enemy, wanting to get you out of the game and take control over your business? Stane was a spy in Tony's fortress. But Tony does not only find bad spies, he also finds good spies. Imagine yourself in his situation, in an unknown place, imprisoned by hostile people who does not even speak your own language, only the language of violence. And in this place, you find a guy in the same situation as you are. Would you trust him? Would you trust Yimsey? Well, Tony could ignore him, or make the best with what he had and accept him as an ally. And Tony kinda had an advantage because Yimsey actually knew Stark in a distant way, while the spies knew nothing about Rahab and also had to deal with the impressions that a person can have about a prostitute. Still, like Stark, they decided to ignore unnecessary thoughts and unite forces. In the case of Tony, their unification, unfortunately, came with a heavy price. After being found by the military, Tony returns home and decides to do something about what he has seen, like stopping being one of those who feeds the system of war and decides to become a new man. A decision which provokes movements in the shadows of his own company, his own territory, that reminds Tony he can't trust everybody, only the real ones like his own 2 spies, Pepper and Rhodey. His priorities as well as his friendships changes or are refined because of his new values. A way of life more responsible and one that faces the world as it is and not how he would like to see it. Which is also another interesting detail because Tony changes after his time at the cave or during his time at the cave. Like when the man stops to believe that the shadows he watched in the cave plateau are the real world when he leaves the cave and feels the heat of the real sun. And something quite curious I would like to add here is that, in a way and unintentionally, the Ironmonger was the flame that provoked the creation of the Iron Man. Perhaps Tony would never have changed if he was never captured by the terrorists. Now I would like to talk about gratitude between these two stories. Going back to Jericho, Rahab demands gratitude from the Hebrew soldiers by making them promise that she and her family would be safe during and after the invasion, in which the promise is remembered and they survive the invasion and even are accepted within the Hebrew people. And what is also interesting is what would have happened if the spies didn't remember or ignore her during the invasion, in which according to them during the bargain, if they failed to spare her and her family, they would be the ones to die. In the case of Tony, even though he's a hard friend to deal with, he demonstrates gratitude and appreciation for the people around him, strangers and close ones, something to be inspired even. But another behavior we see through Obadiah Stane. He's the one who looks for the 10 rings to capture Tony, but what is worth it to be reminded is that Tony survived longer at the beginning of his imprisonment because the 10 rings didn't fully know who they were tasked to capture, showing that Stane wasn't fully transparent with his request. But if we also analyze the side of the 10 rings, they had a task, and after finding out who was the target, instead of just doing their part of the deal, they decided to be greedy and demand more for the job. We can find errors on both sides, including the major error of actually ordering someone to send a person to the Kingdom Come. Later on, Stane deceives the leader of the 10 rings instead of uniting forces with him. With this in mind, we could affirm that what led Stane to his fall was his selfishness, greed, and dishonest behavior, which is interesting because he says that Tony is the one who's selfish, while being the one who's betraying everybody. In the end, the opposite of it, which is gratitude, consideration, is what saved Tony, like it saved Rahab and the Hebrews, and the lack of it is what condemned Stane. Because of envy and greed, Stane literally steals Tony's heart, in which calls my attention to another detail within the Jericho story, when Joshua tells his men to not take any spoils from Jericho, only to destroy it. And if someone actually took something, that would bring curses and disgrace to the Hebrews. And the reason why I remember this is because Stane takes Tony's heart and also dies with it. What protected Tony from becoming like Stane? What was the armor, the arc reactor that protected Tony's heart from the projectiles of greed and envy? Honestly, when I think about it, I believe we don't have to go far. His armor, his reactor, his heart would be composed by his near-death experience that changed his perspective about war and his involvement with it, along with his humbling friendship with Yinsen, his longtime friendships with Pepper and Rhodey, and maybe the fact that he misses his father since he lost him when he was too young. While Tony's armor protects him against selfish thoughts and feelings, and also protects those around him while he becomes a new person with that armor, Stane's armor is built upon greed, selfishness, making him ambitious, but also manipulative, despicable, lonely in his own point of view. In the film, he gets defeated by the Iron Man, but he also gets defeated by himself, as he did not have the same mind and neither the same heart as Tony's. Perhaps one of the lessons we can be reminded of in this story is the importance of being humble, grateful, to recognize when it's time to change, and who we should keep close.